Welcome, everybody. Dr. Josh Long here with AME Podcast, my quest to talk to folks who are still making music beyond the classroom. That's right, the lifelong learning in music engagement and education, I always say, because these folks are continue making music and providing music opportunities for others beyond the classroom. And I'm so excited about this. We are sponsored by Art and Music Emporium, serving artistic excellence. We do such things as fix instruments. We also have a bunch of performance initiatives going on, one being the annual community band down in Wildwood, New Jersey. It's the sixth year that we're doing this. It's an annual community band by the sea. We're so excited every year because we get together in Wildwood and do a performance once a year. We also do other performances, such as the Bethlehem Steel Company Legacy Band, where we recreate history and recreate the original steel band that used to exist in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. We actually do some of their performances and play music that they played back in the day. Both of those initiatives, one being in July for the one down at the beach in Wildwood, and the other one being in October in Bethlehem, anybody can participate. We actually have you come out the day before the concert, do a rehearsal with us, and we do the concert the next day. So if you are interested, please check out www.artmusicemporium.com and see some of the performance initiatives that we have there for you. We are also on YouTube, which I believe you're watching this podcast on. So if you could subscribe to our channel, we have quite a bit of podcasts that come out, and we also put our performances on there. So you can kind of check those out as well. We're also on Facebook. So do give us a like if you're on Facebook, as well as Patreon. We do have a Patreon account, and any proceeds go to helping people continue make music beyond the classroom. And I'm so excited about that just because I meet folks who are still doing that, because I see that decline of people who don't continue making music, and it kind of upsets me because I think we all can make music throughout our entire life. I keep saying that. I'm so excited about our next guest on the podcast. I actually met him at the Association of Concert Bands convention in Maryland. He is a composer and arranger, and he's done quite a bit of works for concert band and jazz ensemble. He's also a military retired musician, which is awesome to talk to. He was in the ceremonial First Company Governor's Foot Guard Band of Connecticut, also the Air National Guard Band of the Northeast, and a unit of the Massachusetts National Guard, and also retired from the 102D Army Band of the Connecticut National Guard in 2018. And it's always great to talk to these folks because they're the ones that are out there still performing and playing for people more of at a professional level. And he still continued to doing this today. Originally, obviously from Connecticut, and I believe he's down in Florida now, a percussionist and also into the woodwind world. Please welcome Joe LaRosa. Hi, Joe. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
Well, thank you, Joe. I'm so excited to have you on this podcast. I know one of our big discussions that we're going to talk about today is going to be your march that you created, which is the USA 250, which is a march that I know a ton of different bands are performing. I believe 150, somewhere around there, I believe.
We're over 150 at this point. Yes.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And I know what's kind of cool about this. I know you dedicated it to the U.S. citizens of the past, the present, and the future. So it's really awesome that you've done this. So I thought maybe I want to hear a little bit about your story too. But I thought you're all in the garb of USA, which is amazing. So why don't we start like right there, talking a little bit about your initiative with your march, just because I actually got to hear the march down at the conference at the Association of Concert Bands.
So I composed it last summer in July, shortly after watching the parade in Washington, D.C. on TV that commemorated the 250th anniversary of the United States Army. And as you mentioned, I spent a little over the 20 years that I've spent in National Guard bands, in the Army Guard band in Connecticut. So I enjoyed the parade, and I certainly, I know it was somewhat controversial at the time, but I just enjoyed it, and it literally struck a few chords, if you will. And I decided to challenge myself and see if I could come up with a march that would have some kind of musical connection to the 250th anniversary. And the reason I say challenge myself is I've been composing since about 1986, 1987. But frankly, while I think I play at a professional level, albeit mostly on a part-time basis, composing has largely been a hobby or a pastime. And having been retired the last 5 years living down in Florida, I've had more time to do that. But actually, we're up in Massachusetts where we spend the summer, and I play with this really cool little town band, as they call them, up on Cape Cod. And for those of you listening around the country, the Cape Cod has a very vibrant town band scene, especially during the summer months. And I'm one of the folks who pops in for the summer season and is fortunate enough to play with some of the groups there. But, probably two-thirds of the band is made up of residents. And I composed a piece for them 2 years ago called Welcome to Brewster. And that was a march as well. And a lot of the bands out there have a specific, band march. And I asked the director, do you guys have a Brewster march? And he said, no. And I tucked that away. And I wrote that over the winter and I brought it back for them the next spring. So my only thought when I sat down to write this was, one, I wanted to be able to complete it. I have somewhat of a track record of starting pieces and never getting around to finishing them. And my only goal was to have something that the Brewster Town Band was going to play. So I got at it, and I didn't even have the luxury of a piano. We kind of glamp it during the summer. We have a 40-foot destination trailer up there, which works fine. It lets us stay in contact with family members from Connecticut and some of our old bandmates that both my wife and I used to work with. And for some reason, this thing came together very, very quickly. I would say within 10 days. I had about 85, 90% of it written out. And for me, that's pretty quick. I'm pretty good and pretty quick in terms of coming up with a sketch. But I've not had any formal training in either composing or arranging. So the orchestration is always the challenge for me. For whatever reason, this just kind of fell into place. But I was happy with it, and but something was missing in my mind, and I'm playing it back and you're doing the last minute edits and checking, articulations and dynamic, which you pretty much kind of deal with that at the end to make sure that they're all in the right place. And then I had this crazy idea that instead of having a long note at the end of the introduction for 3 beats, it's in 6/8. What would happen if I had three short notes instead? And I went back and I used Finale, a notation software, and I made the changes at the end of the introduction. And bang, there it was. Those three notes are USA or 205. So I said, well, let's see if we could do that elsewhere. And I immediately jumped to the ending, did the same thing there. And I think I did it at the end of both times through the first strain and only once through the second strain. And that was a connection. I could have very easily dusted off one of the like 15 other marches that I've written and nobody's ever heard of, and just slapped a title on it and said, okay, here's the march for the 250th. But at the same time, I'd like to think that over the years I've grown as a composer and as a musician. Um, so there it was, and now you go through the back end stuff, which isn't a whole lot of fun when you're doing the pagination and getting the line breaks correct and all that. And as a player, as tedious as it is for a composer and an arranger to do that, you know how important that is. Because how many times have you had something thrown on the bandstand that somebody did quickly, and it's hard to play
Yeah.
if the line breaks are weird and what have you. So that probably slowed down the process a good another week or so, and then you got to get it printed out and everything. So I emailed a copy of the score and just the MIDI recording to the conductor of the Brewster Band, and I didn't know how he was going to react. But he shot me an email back right away and said, "Wow, this is great writing. We'll definitely play it, and it deserves more than our band playing it." And that really kind of struck me because John's a great guy to work with. We've hit it off wonderful. This will be my fifth year of playing with them. But that's a lot of praise from him. He
Yeah.
kind of, you got to earn your plaudits from him. So it just kind of made me think a little bit. And I said, well, there's a couple other bands out here that I played with my first year, the Harwich Town Band and the Barnstable Band, which plays right on the town green in Hyannis. And over the years, they were fortunate enough to get some funding from the Kennedy Family Foundation. So I said, well, let me show it to those directors, and both of those directors had subbed conducting for the Bristol Town or the Brewster Town band, so I at least was familiar with them. They were both pretty happy with it as well. So okay, now my mind gets to thinking, and I graduated from high school in 1976, and that was the actual bicentennial year. And it was a great year to graduate because everything was bicentennial from
Yeah.
January through December 31st. Any annual event that happened in virtually any community had a patriotic twist to it. So one of the things that happened that year that is, to the best of my knowledge, is not happening this year, is the Pentagon put together a band that appropriately enough was called the Bicentennial Band. And
Okay.
it was comprised of top military players from all the branches.
Hmm.
And ironically enough, we went to a concert at the Civic Center in Hartford, along with 10,000 other people. But this band toured the entire country and they did well over 50 concerts. And it stuck out in my mind. Wouldn't it be cool if a band from each of the 50 countries played this? And I started thinking, well, how realistic is that? I really had no interest in trying to get it published, although that was one of the suggestions I had gotten from a couple of the guys that saw it early on. I've had things published in the past. They're not why I'm retired early. Let's put it this way. And it was also late. I thought it was late in the publishing cycle. We're probably now into early August. And the likelihood of a guy my age getting a breakthrough with a new publisher, it's just I had no financial incentive when I started this project,
Mhm.
and but I was more interested in seeing if I could get it played. So I said, well, let's see if we can use social media, let's see if we could use the internet, and let's see if we can get some folks interested. I put a couple of posts out on social media, and I immediately had like 20 hits within the first week. Two of them just completely blew me away. One of them was from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Association band. Like, who knew? Okay,
Wow.
I didn't know they had one.
Yeah.
But the kicker is they play an annual concert at the Reagan Presidential Library in California. And I think they were the second or third band to respond. And my immediate reaction is, wow, this is pretty cool. And this was easier than I thought. And then a few days later, a band from, I believe it was Alabama, checked in, and they're going on a tour of France. And that's going to be happening, I think, in June. And it's the anniversary of D-Day and all that. And they're going to actually be playing at Normandy. And I'm like, all right, Presidential Library, Normandy with a connection to World War II. This is pretty cool. So now I said, I got to get organized because I got emails coming and going. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. So I made up a couple of charts, the 50 states, the bands that had been responding. And I would say by mid-September, when we were back in Florida, I had about 25, 30 bands in maybe 12 or 13 states. And I said, all right, well, I'm going to have to do some work here to get from 13 to 50. And it's funny, the association starts to pop up. I would just do a Google search for community bands and pick a state, Arizona. I'm going alphabetically. And it kept taking me back to the Association of Concert Bands website.
Yeah.
And so I would find some bands and I'd go on their website. And as we were chatting while we were having our technical difficulties before, The only frustrating part about this project has been going on to websites and looking at a picture of a band that you know this piece would be perfect for. They have a history of doing summer concerts, they have a
Yeah.
history of doing patriotic things, and you can't contact them. They have website, they have portals only if you want to donate money or if you want to join the band. So that became frustrating. And the bottom line is, with some assistance from the association, which I was going back to their website so often that by November I said, I gotta check this thing out. And it turns out that they had a composer membership, which I had no idea. And I'm not so sure at that point in life I even seriously considered myself a composer. But some of these bands were starting to convince me. So I looked at they had this composer membership, looked into that, and it had the possibility of the piece being mentioned in their journal, and also the possibility of submitting the score for the piece to be played at the convention. So I said, "What the heck? We'll join and see where this takes us." Um, and I think it was January 1st, I got a very nice email saying that the piece had been selected to be played at the convention. And they asked me if I wanted to come down or come up and conduct it. And I was just completely blown away. At that point alone, I'm so far away from the original idea of just writing a piece for your little local town band. Um, so I tried to put the plans together to do that. A little tricky because, as you saw, my wife just had knee replacement surgery, so getting this
Mhm.
whole thing scheduled and worked around. But actually, it worked out fine. And then I started to get some emails from bands referencing some kind of mention in the journal, and I hadn't gotten my copy yet, so I didn't know what they were talking about. But sure enough, it came in the mail about a week later, and wow, they really do a nice job, Sarah and the other folks that work in the staff. It's a full color, glossy. You don't even see publications like that anymore. And sure enough, in the page of new compositions is my March USA 250. So that really helped as well. And now being able to promote in an email, if you will, that the piece was going to be played at the convention started to give it a little juice. And by lunchtime on the Friday afternoon of the convention, um, we played it in the afternoon. That lunchtime, we went over 150 bands across the country, which is so far beyond anything I ever expected. It's amazing. I'm still missing four states. I'm still missing Alaska, Oklahoma, Mississippi, and Nevada.
Okay.
And again, it's that same scenario. I've looked at websites, and there's bands that would be absolute. This piece would be absolutely perfect. You can't get through to them through their
Yeah.
websites. But I mean, I understand concerns about viruses and this, that, and the other thing. But it is a bit frustrating. But the positives far, far outweigh the negatives. And now the stage that I'm at is I'm getting emails from bands of what dates they're playing it. So I'm trying to keep a list of that. That's a little harder. But it was played twice in Texas and in Utah, of all places, already. Now that was one of the harder states to track down. I think there might be more cattle in Utah than there are people. So some of the flyover states, were a little bit difficult. But and then there's a couple of bands in Connecticut that will be playing it. So we're heading up probably the first or second week in June, and I can run over. I have some friends that play in those groups, and then my wife's brother lives up in Vermont. We haven't seen him for a couple of years, and there's a band up there that's going to play it. So we'll probably make a run up there in July to hear that. So it's going to be fun. The Brewster Band has it scheduled for July 5th. The Barnstable Band has it scheduled for July 8th, and that's prime time for what, I envision this piece
Yeah.
right around the 4th of July. The newer bands that have kind of been contacting me more recently, and then bands that don't play over the summer, which a lot of bands operate on an academic year, maybe
Hmm.
September through
Yeah.
May or whatever. They're lining it up for Veterans Day, which was is again beyond anything I was thinking of it. I didn't think it would have, a very long life, but that's also been kind of encouraging. So the phrase I used at the convention is it's taken on a life of its own, and I'm just going along for the ride at this point.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, that's
That's
awesome. I have a couple things I actually wanted to tell you about it.
sure.
We're going to staple it in our annual Community Band by the Sea concert on July 25th. So, of course,
Cool.
it'll be cool to see how many people actually play it, or bands, I should say, play in July. That'd be kind of cool to like keep track of, especially, around the 4th of July.
I think by far that'll be the busiest month.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also wanted to tell you, I haven't shared this with you yet, but I actually have a couple friends in Oklahoma. So hopefully one of them,
Oh,
I'm
well,
going
that
to
would be
send you a
great.
list. I have
That would be great.
a good professor friend out there, and I was, I reached out. I'm like, and I asked him, and he's like, yeah. And he was actually, which we'll talk about later. He was asking about it too, as well.
Hmm,
So I'll have to talk to you about
cool. That would be
that.
great.
Well, one thing, I know you keep saying, I got a couple questions, and then we'll kind of, I know you want to share the music and everything, but one thing I was saying is I know it's kind of become a life of its own, and I know it's like first thing I want to ask beyond that, first of all, because I'm going to come back to that. But first, like the first, interest in just composing it for your, the local town band, as you say it. What was your kind of your inspiration for that? I mean, obviously, I know, the 250th is a big part of it, right? But you took the time to actually sit down and actually compose it and put it together and, think through that. And I was just interested if you want to share a little bit about that inspiration and motivation to do it.
So one of the challenges that I mentioned this earlier is I've had is actually completing pieces.
Okay.
And I probably have about 50 pieces split up probably evenly between marches and pieces for full concert band,
Yeah.
full big band, and little big band. My wife and I had a 10-piece swing orchestra that we operated in about the 12 years leading up to COVID. And again, not having the most arranging and or
Yeah.
orchestrating experience, writing for six horns was actually pretty easy, relatively speaking. And we were strictly a little dance band.
Hmm.
Even though we did a lot of public concerts, everything was, straight swing tempos and Latin stuff. And the other thing besides marches that comes very easy to me is writing danceable Latin tunes, cha-cha, also cha-chas, rumbas, tangos, all that kind of stuff. So what I where I have had some success is if there's a specific reason or a specific target date. Like when we moved down here, I wrote a piece that the little band in our development played, and I threw that together relatively quickly. It was the development's 40th anniversary, and I sensed that the best opportunity I had to get it in a director's hand was before we moved or before we traveled back to Florida, where we lived 9 months of the year. So I had a bit of a, timetable on my hands. But in terms of the inspiration is, I spent 20 years playing in reserve component bands, the 5 years before that in the ceremonial band in Connecticut. My father spent the Korean War playing in the Air Force music program. So that whole march thing is pretty much embedded in my head. And it kind of makes up for not having that formal orchestration and counterpoint and advanced theory. I had 1 year of 2 semesters of non-music major theory to my claim. The rest of it, now over the years, I've studied a lot of scores. I've tried to get through all those books. They're all on the counter over there and in my bookcase, but three-quarters of the material in there just flies over my head. But the timing was a big piece of it.
Yeah.
And again, seeing that parade, and also coming to the realization is, yeah, you graduated from high school in the bicentennial. You're lucky enough to still be alive for the 250th. You ain't going to be here for the 300th. So if you want to tie in something, it's not kind of now or never. And having some kind of a deadline has always helped me to get from starting a project to finishing it. So I guess that's kind of, hopefully that's the right answer.
No, yeah, there's no right or wrong answer. And what's kind of cool is, I just wanted to share this with you. I know keep saying, that you're not a very well trained composer and arranger, but I'll say this, as I always say this, even when the community band world or town band world or any band world really, in the beginning, who was? And I say it that way because you know what I mean? You're taking a time of something that's going on and putting music to it. And what's really cool about it, I just wanted to share was how you're gearing it to the groups that are out there performing for the United States Americans who are going to be doing the celebration. And that's what it's all about.
And part of my reasoning in not wanting to profit from this was a lot of those groups really struggled during COVID. I know one of the bands out at the Cape, which has a long history. And literally, when I was 7 years old, so we're talking 60 years ago, I can remember going to see their band concerts on the Green in Hyannis. And they were like 35, 40. Some years they were like 50. They could barely fit on the stage. And they lost, a handful of their members during COVID. And, put yourself in your shoes of you sat next to Fred for 10, 15 years at concerts and rehearsals, and he's not here anymore. So some of their other members were reluctant to come back. In some cases, for health reasons, they were still concerned, right? And maybe it was an emotional thing, I'm missing my buddy, I don't want to do that. And it would have been the summer of 22 when I went over and actually played drums for them for a few weeks because they were really short-handed. And, that was the vibe at the time. And they were just hoping to get through the summer. And there's so many I'm going to call them institutions in communities across the country. Whether it was, the local ladies club, whether it was a veterans group, a lot of groups really suffered and they couldn't get together. If they were reliant on rental income to keep their building afloat,
Hmm.
they really struggled. And
Yeah.
some of those chapters and, fell by the wayside. So I've had a lot of great feedback, and it's been called generous and this, that, and the other thing. Two of the more touching came. There's a band in, I believe it's Hendersonville, North Carolina. And if you remember, that area got clobbered with flooding about 18 months ago or so.
Hmm.
And the president of the band wrote me an email and said, yeah, we definitely will play it. And you don't know how important this is to us. We lost our entire library during the flood, and we got a grant, to start, rebuilding. But what music, what's
Yeah.
a chart cost? 50, 60, 70, $80.
Yeah,
If
right.
you get a $2,500 grant, how far is that going to go in a
Right.
concert band library where, you're doing
Right.
half a dozen shows a year? So sometimes when I'm an old-fashioned guy, you just try to do the right things, you try to make the right decisions, and you hope that it turns out right. And those kind of comments and that kind of feedback to me at this point in my life, we've both been blessed to still be around and to hear that you could have that kind of impact. and a little community band. Nobody's profiting off of that
Right.
band, but to kind of give them a hand. And I've had similar comments from a lot of bands. We don't have a budget to buy a lot of new music and this and that and the other thing. So that piece of it has been very appreciated by the bands, and to hear that is kind of cool for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. And that's such an awesome like way to think about things because, just kind of helping people and providing the music because you're right. I always joke, I know money was different back in the day, but you see some of those older charts and they were what, like $10,
Oh yeah,
$4,
yeah, it's fun.
$5, you
Oh,
know,
I
and
I
but
have
today it's
March
so expensive.
I have March books, the little with maybe 10 marches in them, and they were like 50 cents a piece
Yeah.
for that a clarinet part to it or whatever. And it's funny, but today, um, probably the average band piece is anywhere between 50 and 80 bucks a
Yeah.
pop. And that adds up quickly. This, now some of the bands, from what I can tell, it's been interesting to look at the different websites, and it's cool to see how organized and how advanced some of the groups have become.
Right.
They have sponsors. Some of them operate almost on a basis of a local symphony. And I know in some cases some of the folks are getting paid, which is fine. The municipal bands out in the Midwest are still getting some money, it appears, from the towns and whatever. But I grew up playing in union bands, and I was the seventh member of my extended family to be in the musicians union in Hartford,
Mhm.
by the time I got out of high school. And that's all that the MPTF, the Music Performance Trust Fund, and money were a few pennies from every record that was sold used
Mhm.
to go into this fund, and it would be distributed through the locals throughout the country. Well, nobody buys records anymore,
Mhm.
and that whole pot has largely vanished. And with it, has gone a lot of live music. And I think in the concert band genre, the community bands that we see today were in many communities run on a professional basis at one time.
Yep.
But everything's expensive now. Just getting access to rehearsal
Yep.
space, you got to have insurance. You got, before, if you knew Fred, who was the janitor, or you knew the principal at the school, they got a band director, they could let you in. But now our society is so much more complicated. It's difficult for these groups. So, I was very fortunate to be able to put in 20 years. I had some physical obstacles I had to overcome, including some injuries from a really bad car crash, but my unit stuck with me. And 8 operations later, here I am. But I'm grateful for the support that I had from them, and it's been very helpful for us, and enjoying some retirement years. So yeah, this was not something that was started, to fund a trip or a cruise or whatever. It was
Yep.
just, kind of a whim, but it's kind of fun at this age to still be able to produce something that people think is worth playing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can't hit the golf ball as well as I could, but seems like I came up with something that works. So that's cool.
No, and it's just awesome, and it's just great that you're, I always say this, giving back to the community, giving back to, the bands, I that's actually how I kind of got into this. I think I told you a little bit ago. I started capturing voices for this podcast because, you used to see how many bands in an area. In my own
I,
little town in Pennsylvania, there was like seven, and now, it's so hard because just like you said, I mean, even our one little concert that we have all the time. It's the insurance. It's just it's like there's so much that has to occur to have it happen.
Well, like even if you're doing it commercially, right? Somebody will call you and they say, "Well, we need a band for an hour." Okay. Or well, we normally charge based on a longer performance. Well, we only need you an hour. Yeah, but I still have to drive to your place.
Uh-huh.
I still have to drive home. I still have to set up the PA system, and we can't work anywhere else that night.
Yep.
So, all right, we can negotiate, but and then you're not just paying for that hour, right? You're paying for a lifetime of, practicing and lessons that have gone into it
Yep.
and upkeep on the instruments. And, that's another thing for, um, some community bands have pretty elaborate setups, and some of them are fortunate enough to have relationships with either a school district or maybe a college where they have access to percussion equipment. But try to go out and buy a lineup of percussion equipment, timps, good cymbals and all that. You're talking thousands of dollars, and it's not like somebody's walking around with a set of timpanis in their back pocket.
Yeah.
Um, so all that stuff adds up, and
Yeah.
yeah, and there, though at the same time there are some companies and there are organizations around the country that still, find a way to raise some money to promote, bands and live
Right.
performances. We were very fortunate with our little swing group in Connecticut. We recruited a sponsor. It was a bank that was just growing, and we went from doing 11 concerts for them to 22
Wow.
as they grew. And then they grew so much that another bank ate them up, and we were out of business. But if you have a product, even if it's a community band, bands are getting more sophisticated. They've understood by and large the concept of theme-based programs.
Right.
And that's a really big thing. If you're in a commercial setting, it gives people a reason to hire you again.
Right.
And repeat business is a lot easier to get than startup business. But also, if you have an audience or in a community, and if you're playing music, a movie night or around the world, where what there's dozens of
Yeah.
themes that you can come up with, but then you're giving people in the community who may not be part of, they don't go to every concert that you have. They don't have a
Right.
relative that's in the band or a friend, but gee, they see something. Yeah, I like music from the movies, or I'd like to hear music from different parts of the world.
Mhm.
You're starting to see groups I think, become a lot more sophisticated than they were. It used to be, the XYZ band is playing Wednesday night at such and such park, and that's all you knew. Well, okay, that's going to draw some folks, but if you can come up with a theme for that specific program, the regulars are going to still show, but now you're going to maybe
Yeah.
have some people come that wouldn't have come otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of say that all the time. I know it seems in the band world they're reinventing, the performances and the concerts, just like you say, or doing actual, showing of movies, or doing believe it or not, I went to University of Hartford, so I was up in the Hartford area, the
I
Bushnell
saw
for
that. Yeah,
yeah, I know the Bushnell, for example. I know they
right.
did some different, and this is not a band, but their orchestra. They did, some different kind of themed concerts where, they'll provide lighting or different kind of things going on, and it's kind of cool,
Well,
to see that.
here's an idea for your performance of the March in July. In the program notes, um, I suggest that you can make little placards that say either USA or 250, and either have members of the audience kind of hold them when you get to that section, or members of the band if it's a bigger group. But yeah, groups are doing like slideshows, or
Yeah,
what do you call it, PowerPoint,
PowerPoints. Yeah,
playing that while the band is playing. And for years the opera companies have had the translations
yeah,
that they project on screen, which makes it so much more enjoyable. You can understand what the lyrics about
yeah,
if it's in Italian, or if it's in French, or if it's in German. We're not all as fluent in those languages. But yeah, bells and whistles, you don't want to kind of cross the line to where it becomes like tacky,
Yeah.
but things that will hold people's interest. One of the things that my wife and I just get a huge kick out of at the bands at Cape Cod, they still do the march arounds.
Okay.
So at the end of like the first half of the program, the Brewstertown band will invite, and other bands do it. Chatham does it as well. They invite people to come up, and the Brewster band has gotten a donation from a family of a couple that were in Army bands, and they've bought, I don't know how many hundred little flags, and they'll hand them out to the little kids that come up and the grandparents and who's got the dog and who's got the grandkids and whatever. And we'll play a march, and they literally march around the gazebo. And, with all the crazy stuff that's going on in the country, for this to be 2024, 25, 26,
Yeah.
and see people being able to enjoy
Hmm.
an experience like that. And we do that every week throughout the summer. I think the Chatham band does it as well. It's kind of cool, and it lets them get involved a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
I've noticed the last couple of years, the Brewster Band has been programming. Jerry Brubaker was at the arranger was at the convention. I
Yeah.
know we've played a few of his Pixar arrangements, and they're playing. You can almost hear, you play the Moana stuff, and you can hear the little kids actually singing along,
Yeah.
and some of the Pixar stuff and stuff like that. So even when I first started playing with that group 5 years ago, it was largely the Broadway stuff, Oklahoma, Music Man, Sound of Music, and they still play some of that, but they shifted some of the programming to be a little more
Yeah.
contemporary, a few more, and a number of them are things that Jerry wrote. Yeah, I was kind of intimidated when I went to one of the seminars that they had on the copyright, and the fella doing the seminar mentioned that Jerry was there and Yari Villanueva, who wrote that new arrangement of the Armed Forces medley that
Yep.
includes the space song, the
Yeah.
Space Force
Space
song.
Force. Yep.
And now, within 3 to 5 years, that'll be the one that replaces the Loudon version that we've been
Yep.
playing for 65 years
Yep.
that I know of. I've been playing it seems that long. But the two of them were sitting in the row behind me. It's like, what am I doing here? It's like the big boys are here. But it's fun to see that kind of stuff. We the a about 2/3 of the Brewster Band, because that's all we can get up on the trailer. We play on a float in the Fourth of July parade,
Mhm.
and that's a hoot. Everybody's up there. They're throwing kids out. The floats are throwing candy to the kids and what have you. And we have our differences, and we're not perfect. But when you talk about inspiration, 250, that's 250 years. And there are a lot of arguments that went on, you know, 100 years ago, 200 years ago.
Right.
It's like, for a day, can you put aside the nonsense and just appreciate what we have? And it's not to take sides in this. It's just call time out and enjoy what we have, because we have more than, most people could ever dream of. And I'm grateful for the opportunities. All four of my grandparents were born in Italy. They all immigrated here. One of the coolest things I ever get to play at was in the Air Guard band. We got to play the Ellis Island Medals Freedom ceremony for 2 years, and we went up Friday. First thing Saturday morning was set up, and then they cut us loose for about 3 hours. We got to go through the museum, and I got to go through the computer, got to see what boat, what day they came on, found their name on
Wow.
the transcripts, and that really hit home. And there were some pretty cool people getting awarded the 2 years we did it. Jerry Lewis was one, Don Shula from the Dolphins coach, and
Yeah.
Mike Piazza from the Mets was another one. He had the best line. It was so windy. And I love seeing stages and events come to life. You get there early in the day in the band, and the caterer's running around, and the flower guy comes in, and all the pieces of the puzzle are coming together. Well, that event is played under a huge tent.
Okay.
And the night that Piazza got awarded, it was incredibly windy. So they announced him as having been the MVP of the National League. And he says, forget about me. He says, the MVP tonight is whoever put this tent together, and it's still holding up in the wind. He says, we all should be in the river by now. And it was really kind of crazy. We're playing, and you thought you were hearing extra drums in the background
Wow.
when the wind was so strong. But, to have the opportunity to play events like that, um, over the years in the service, it's funny. I was fortunate enough to march alongside my father, and we banged heads a lot about music and other things. But when I was playing in the Governor's Foot Guard Band, we played in President Carter's inaugural. And then there was a couple of governors' inaugurals in Connecticut as well. But those are things you don't forget about.
Right.
They're in that case, even though I spent 20 years in reserve component bands, that was the only president I ever played for. So you're not going to forget. We froze our, it was a very cold day and it snowed the night before, which is somewhat unusual for Washington. And then President Carter decided to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue. He was the first president to have done that, I think, since prior to the Kennedy assassination thing. And he was driving the Secret Service guys crazy, but it also slowed down the line of march. And
Yeah.
we're waiting and waiting and waiting and freezing. But we had our little moment in the sun as we went down Pennsylvania Avenue. And you in the in the guard bands, it's really cool. It kind of ties into community based again. The smaller town that we went to, the better we were treated. The Air Guard band was cool because even though it was a unit of the Mass Air Guard,
Uh-huh.
our area of responsibility was all of New England and the eastern part of New York. So I kiddingly, being the jokester as I am, I used to call it the Air Bus Band because we bussed all over the place. But the smaller the town that we went to, the bigger a deal it was for them.
Yeah.
And they would pull, dinners, and I don't even know how they'd find our logo online, I guess, and they'd make a big cake with our logo on it. And, they always had some little knickknack, whatever their little town thing was. And, you're gone for a couple of weeks, right, from your families because it's a 2 week concert tour. And it's nice to know that what you're doing is appreciated as well. And that's a cool thing too. You get there in the afternoon, you set everything up, do a sound check, and then you go off and somebody's taking care of you for dinner. You change, and then when you come back, there's like no green space left. It's all blankets and chairs. And when you got there, it was just this big open field.
Yeah.
So the crowds that we would get in these little towns were pretty amazing. You go to Boston and they're ready to ticket the equipment truck in Faneuil Hall or whatever. But that was a great ride, and they're obviously not playing, applauding for you individually, but you're part of something bigger than yourself. And
Yeah.
anybody that plays in any kind of band, if you don't have that mindset, it's not going to work. It's the collective effort. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's awesome you say that because I always think about that, two things that you just kind of shared. One being, as you made a comment that you were, performing with your father, you know what I mean? And different ages, and not to be smart, but just like how even community bands or military bands or whatever, we have all these different ages, all these different experiences come together, and just exactly what you said. We get together performing and we're doing something beyond us, just us. You know what I mean?
The concept of intergenerational learning was the rule at one time. Unfortunately, complicated society, unfortunate things happen. But one of the coolest things I've ever seen, I took a jazz history class as part of a master's degree at Wesleyan, And we went to New York City and we heard bands in the club, but we went down early in the morning and in this jazz club on Saturday mornings, they had this deal where some old timers would play. And I couldn't figure out the system because there didn't seem to be a system. Then I realized afterwards, like every hour, a different crop of kids would come in and they would basically sit in with
Okay.
these pro players. I mean,
Yeah.
these guys were top-notch players,
Yeah. Yeah.
but and then like their hour was gone, and these other guys, but being in the city, like time is like a transient thing. It's a
Yeah.
suggestion,
Right.
right?
Yep.
So kids are coming and going, and you'd have a guy playing the piano, and he's playing with his left hand, and one kid's playing, on the right hand above him, and what have you, and that kind of experience. I mean, I was 17 when I started playing in the Governor's Foot Guard Band. There were guys in their 70s, 60s and 70s who had been playing this stuff, long before I was born. And while I was a late bloomer musically, my father stuck a clarinet in my hand when I was in fourth grade. And to be honest with you, I hated it. I loved music. I did not like the instrument, and we banged heads. But as I came to understand later, and I wish to this day he had shared this kind of thing that he had in the back of his mind. In his mind, the clarinet saved his life playing in the band during the Korean War.
Okay.
And Vietnam was going on during that era for me.
Hmm.
And I wanted to play the drums.
Hmm.
And I knew that I could bang any rhythm on any table and I'd get in trouble in
Yeah.
school, and I knew that I would be good at it. And what really was frustrating is his partner in their little band had all kinds of drums. And then I had an uncle who was an excellent drummer. The Landerman Agency was the top booking agency in Connecticut for years. He worked for them 5, 6 nights a week. And he could play jazz, he could play big band, but he read, if the fly was on the page, he read it.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case with drummers. And he was more than willing to give me lessons. And it would come to a head every Christmas. Christmas Eve was at our house, and Uncle Early would say, "Oh, I got a set of drums waiting for you." And the other uncle would be looking at me, just with a look, but he's saying, "Yeah, I'm ready to teach you." And my father would just like shake his head. And this went on for years. Along the way, he bought a new tenor and gave me his old one. That kind of pacified me a little bit. I always liked the counter melody lines that like the tenor will double a baritone horn or a euphonium. So that
Yeah.
kind of pacified me for a while. Then there was one Christmas Eve, and it was like 74 or 75 when, the uncle said, "Yeah, I got those drums for you." And there was no shake of the head. And so after dinner, while the ladies are cleaning up and we're in the living room, he says, "I'm bringing the drums over tomorrow." I says, "What do you mean?" He says, "He didn't say no." And I'm saying, "He didn't say yes either." And, and he says, "I've been working with your father for 30 years. If he wanted to say no, he'd have said no." The next morning, he drops off this gorgeous Slingerland white pearl set. And the following Saturday, my other uncle comes over and he starts teaching me. And I already knew how to read music. And clearly, having played a woodwind instrument led me to be more musical as a drummer. But I picked up reading in a kick, and he did something that I just have not seen many percussion teachers do. He brought over this record of Eddie Lockjaw Davis, who is Ray Charles' music director for years
Hmm.
and had played in the Basie band, who's the tenor solo. Um, and it's just a basic swing album at different tempos, and he had this drill that he would put me through, play 4 bars of quarter notes, 4 bars of eighth notes, 4 bars of triplets, 4 bars of 16th notes. and he called it spacing. And it was about putting those, even if it's just four quarter notes, put them on the spot, not a 30-second note before or a 30-second note after. And it was drilled into my head that if I go play a gig tomorrow, that's what I'm doing before I play the gig.
Yep.
It's spacing. And then at the more advanced, I thought I was good because I could do that. Well, now you're going to do it with double strokes, and now you're going to do it with triplets, three in one hand and the other. And it was a very old fashioned way of doing that. I've never seen that in any other venue. And I actually proposed it at one time as a lesson when I was going to get certified, and my lesson plan was rejected by the teacher. And I'm
Wow.
like, it's like, you know, do you ever play drums? It's like, you know, the people that crack me up are the ones that have got their head in the music and they're trying to play every lick, every note
Yep.
that's there, and the band's like, a beat and a half ahead of them or behind them.
Yep.
It's like, what's the groove? Lay it
Yep.
down. You're playing, especially you're outside, you're doing whatever you're doing. It's like keep if the pulse isn't there, nobody else can figure out where one is.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Nobody's going to care if you play two eighth notes instead of, two 16th notes, but find one. To me, for musicians, we all get lost.
Yep.
I don't care how good a player you are. I don't care who you studied with. I read all these resumes. Oh, I studied with this guy, studied with that guy. You hire them to play a date, and like they miss the DS. They miss that. They miss this, and it's like I see. We call them transition bands, right? When if you adjudicate and concert bands are always playing what 90%, well maybe it's lower now, but when I cut my teeth, probably 85 to 90% of what you played were transcriptions.
Yep.
And if you're playing medleys, you're constantly changing keys and you're constantly changing tempo or meters. And if it takes the band four measures to settle in the note, you're a transition band,
Right.
and
Right.
your transitions. But you have to anticipate as the drummer, you have to anticipate those.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
if you're waiting until that next downbeat and you didn't anticipate them, the chances of you
Yep.
catching that clean are slim and none. But if I think back to that crazy drill, and he would have me do it for 5 minutes. But it's like if you're playing in three and you're going to four, or you're going to two, or you're going to 6/8. It's that whole concept again,
Yeah.
and then you could take it to drum set playing as well and do it around the set instead of just doing
Yep.
it. Yeah, I thought I was really cool, right? So I'm doing this thing and I practice this thing. And the first thing he did is went to the double strokes and now do four of single strokes, now do four of double strokes. And with triplets, do three in one hand and three in the other hand. And it's like, is this gonna ever end? But to me, that was a foundation. And then it was okay, now you got all that, now we're gonna do it around the drum set.
Yeah.
And you look at Buddy Rich, drum solos, which, it's way out of my league, but you could sit back and you can see the rudiments that are based
Yeah.
in that. And, he could play at speeds that, we can only hope to, but it's all based on fundamentals. And you got the other side of it is you got to have fun. I wish, like, I to get back to the thing with my father and I, it's like it wasn't until I was in college and after a rehearsal of the governor's band, where I'm sitting at a table with the younger guys, and he's sitting with a bunch of guys that have played in service bands, and they're telling their stories, and we're plotting our, you know, attack on the next set of skirts that we can find. And in the background, I hear him telling this story about one day he came into rehearsal hall at the Westover Air Force Base in
Hmm.
Massachusetts, which was his first duty spot after basic. And it was right when Korea was at the peak, and there was one drummer out of four. The only guy left was the section leader. The other three guys had gotten shipped to Korea.
Oh, wow.
And they took like the fourth French horn player and said, "You're going to hit the bass drum." And they took like the inside chair clarinet player and said, "You're going to hit the cymbals. And we're going to live without timps and bells until we get restocked." And we never discussed this.
Hmm.
I'm totally convinced to this day that that's why he wouldn't let me play drums until after the draft was over for Vietnam.
Yeah, right.
And I do think back at like how different our relationship would have been and how different my career would have been if I could have studied, you know, when I was 10 or 12 instead of when I was 17 or 18, you know. But it is what it is, and it's all turned out fine, but there was a lot of headbanging there along the way,
Sure.
that was not always pretty, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I look back, yeah, I had advantages, playing with
Yeah.
those people and stuff, but at the same time, it was frustrating to wonder, like, okay, how good could you have been, if you started this earlier? But
Yeah.
the cool part was playing with those guys, and then in time, I would never consider myself a great player at any level, but when I was going to college and playing with those guys, a lot of them had their own little bands.
Right.
This guy had a polka band, this guy had a wedding band, this guy had another big band and whatever. And I kind of made a reputation for myself at I can get you through a night. If somebody was sick at the last minute or somebody was going on vacation. And before long, I was playing 2, 3 nights a week when I was going to college,
Right. Right.
which helped because I wasn't a genius. So instead of having to work at the library for 20 hours, I basically gave up my social life on Friday, Saturday night, but I had that extra time to study.
Yeah, right.
And I was making more money than the guy who was working, 20 hours at a library, which was nice too. Um, but I played with anybody,
Yeah.
and I learned, I learned guys that I wanted to be like, and I learned guys that I didn't want to be like.
Hmm.
I mean, there are literally guys who drove me to the gig and I drove them home
Right.
because, and that, you saw firsthand what the business can do to you
Yep.
if you don't take care of yourself. Um, but I feel sorry in a lot of ways for the kids today because with technology, whether it's karaoke and the DJs and what have you, I mean, there's kids that are spending, tens of thousands of dollars pursuing degrees in performance, and there's just not enough Saturday night gigs
Yep.
left
Hmm.
to pay those loans off, or if it's their parents' money or whatever. And they play so much better than I ever did, and a lot of those guys did. But it's supply and demand, right? There was
Hmm.
plenty of demand for work because if it was the Veterans Club, if it was a Knights of Columbus Club, everybody had live music.
Yep. Hmm.
Now 90% of that stuff is DJs,
Yep.
and 5% of it is one or two people singing to glorified background tracks. I call it glorified karaoke. And maybe 5 to 7% of those kinds of events are actually played by bands. And they're all cutting each other's throat, and they wind up playing for next to nothing,
Yep.
and
Yep.
and yet you have kid after kid who, is chasing a dream.
Yep.
And, our son went to Hart and kind of went down that road. He wouldn't listen, and and it's an expensive
Yeah.
lesson to
Hmm.
learn. Um, but times change, and it's you just wonder once that technology that what's the phrase, once it's out of the bottle, it's like how do you capture it back?
Yep.
Like the unions were never the full answer, but like they used to have minimums. Like for a parade you had to have 20 guys,
Yep.
For a concert band, you had to have, I think, 24. For a dance band, you had to have at least 14 or whatever. And at least it kept some sense of normalcy, I guess, you
Yeah.
know.
Yep.
Um, but that's probably the one complaint that my wife and I have since we've come down to Florida. It's like you don't see like conventional bands. It most of the entertainment is one or two people singing to background tracks, and they're okay. But I mean,
Yeah.
I'd rather hear a live band,
Yeah.
and I understand it's a cost thing as
Yep.
well. But I went to see, I think it was Sheena Easton up at the casino. Was it Mohegan Sun that has the free shows? I think up in
Yep.
Connecticut.
Yep. Hmm.
And here's somebody who had number one hits, right?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the stage, and is the piano player playing the bass licks? But he was playing multi-stack keyboards, and at one point, both of his hands are up here, and the bass line's still going. They're playing the tracks,
Yep.
and it's like, if it happens at that level, I guess you almost have to accept it
Yeah.
at the local club level. But
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of on that same realm. It's like it's so sad that, everything performance wise have been decreasing and decreasing. And not that it's gone, but that's like my biggest feel is like I want to keep bands alive and keep music and live music alive. And it's so hard,
it
just like you
is.
said, it's always a money thing. And then I always see like, point of the podcast, I always say like you see people play in school and then that they stop because there's no opportunity or they don't
Right.
want to be a part of it anymore, because
But it's funny. Like I frankly did not have a whole lot of experience in community bands because, like I say, that that Governor's Band was the strangest thing I've ever heard of. It was actually a union band,
yeah. Well,
and when we played concerts in the park or were hired to play in a parade, we had union scale.
yep.
But if we're playing an actual government thing, it was voluntary. But
Yeah.
it was this weird combination. Um, but most of the playing that I've done it's been part time largely, but it's been at a professional level. I conducted a couple of community bands. I conducted the Bristol Brass and Wind, and I did a little bit with the Cheshire Band in Connecticut. But most of my playing has been either in military bands or in commercial bands. The bands out in the Cape they just crack me up. Because on the one hand, Massachusetts is a lot like Connecticut and like it's real provincial.
Yeah.
It's almost
Yeah.
like Italy, where like nobody's Italian, everybody's from this town or they're at that region. And I think there's like seven or eight of these town bands out on the Cape. And the three that I've played with, which they're probably within a 10-mile area, probably a third of the people play in all three bands.
Yep.
But they
Yep.
each one has a different vibe
Yep.
to
Yep.
it. And they're very, very provincial and they each have their own like traditions and customs. But you'll see there's someone out, they'll come in and, they're very hesitant and insecure. It's maybe the first summer that they've played since high school or since college or whatever, and they're just kind of dipping their toes back into the water. And now you go back and play with them 3 or 4 years later, and they're like one of the guys or one of the girls.
Right. Yep.
They're just, but it's funny to see that comfort level,
Yeah.
as they're starting to feel more comfortable with the people and also with their playing,
Yeah. Right.
and it's fun to see them develop. One of
Yep.
the bands last year had one trumpet player had some kind of illness he couldn't play, and the other one had a conflict with family. So the other guys had to kind of like step up to the plate in the trumpet
Yeah.
side, and it was cool. I don't know that they could have done that,
Right.
4 or 5 years ago, but having played all the time now, and that's cool to see too.
Yeah.
And it's the climate. or the thing that Viv and I were most proud about our little group was the working environment.
Hmm.
I mean, we worked a lot. I mean, we were doing 40 dates a year for a part-time
Wow.
10-piece swing band.
Yeah,
That's a lot of work.
it is. Yeah.
Most of it, like 25 of those dates would be June through Labor Day. And we were going at it 2, 3 nights a week. And
Jeez.
I was gone for 2 weeks with the guard band. So that was like condensed. There's like 25 dates within like 10 weeks. And obviously you're going to have subs. It's over the summer. And we were very fortunate. I mean, our guys were very loyalists, but you're not going to expect somebody to give up a family vacation, for a
Yeah.
Tuesday night concert in the park.
Yeah.
We had developed a reputation where we could bring in guys that could come in and could read the book, but their response was like always the same. It was, wow, this was fun. And first of all, I mean, there was a set list on the bandstand when they got there. The
Hmm.
book was in order because at the end of the night, we'd ask everybody to put the charts back in order.
Yeah.
So when somebody, if say you're the one that got sick,
Hmm.
the guy coming in and play your book needs to not have to be, I'm not in the middle counting off a tune and you can't find 324,
Yeah.
it's,
Right. Right.
I
Right.
gotta be there. But the night that I knew we had something special was we kind of operated on the same basis as the guard bands that I served in was, look, we don't want anybody getting hurt here. Being on time is important and what have you. But if you're stuck in bad weather or there's an accident, whatever, call whoever your section leader is and let them know.
Yeah.
And I had a call one night from one of our guys, and I get a text, and it's like, I'm not going to. We always wanted guys that are a half hour early, so we could do a sound check, go through the set list, then we'd cut them loose. And he said, "I'm not going to make it for it was 7 o'clock. Yeah, I'm not going to make it for 6:30, but I'll be there by quarter of. I'm 3 exits away now." Okay, before I turn around and tell the guy that plays the other book to put his book in order, he's already doing it, and that's in sports, really good teams, the coaches will instill this concept that like play for the guy next to you.
Hmm.
Don't just play for yourself. And I've played in big bands where it's cutthroat
Yeah.
and people think that they're making themselves look good by not helping somebody else and maybe have something not go right.
Right.
But I was the night that I remember going home and telling Viv, I said, he called and I turned over and the guy was putting the book and I never said a word. But that guy understood as much as we worked, next week he could get stuck in traffic,
Yeah. Right. Right.
you know? And that, if you're a 30-piece concert band, and when are a lot of those concerts? They're after work.
Yeah.
Middle of the week, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. And guess what? You're not the only one going to the concert, right? There's an audience that's going there as well.
Right.
As responsible as you think you are, traffic jams happen. Hey, I
Yeah.
just got a nail in my tire the other day.
Yeah.
Stuff happens. If you have that, and the other side of it is you don't want somebody getting hurt, in a
Yeah.
car crash rushing. I mean, we had a guy that called me one night and said, you, "I'm supposed to play for you tomorrow night," and he was a sub, but he was a really top-notch player. Is my mother just died? Do you think you can find somebody else? I said, if you are anywhere near our bandstand tomorrow night, I will never hire you again.
Hmm.
Go do what you need to do with your family.
Yeah. Right.
And, we found somebody else, but whether we did or we didn't, but he called, right?
Yeah.
And, let me know. And it's like, of course,
Yeah. Right.
we had a kid who was going to Hart, graduated from Hart and was working with us and really good tenor player. And he calls me up like in late July and he says, you're gonna kill me. I said, well, I'm not gonna kill anybody. I just got hired for a cruise gig. And I said, when you leaving? And it's like the third week of August. I said, all right, how long are you going to be gone? It's like 3 months. I said, well, I'll have a seat for you for New Year's Eve. And sure enough, he went off,
Yeah.
he did his cruise thing, and he
Yeah.
played New Year's Eve with us. It's like
Yeah.
you if you're in that leadership role, part of your job is to have an environment where people grow and develop. At the same time, when somebody tells you on Thursday night that they're not doing Saturday night's gig because somebody else is paying them $10 more,
Right.
that guy doesn't work for you again. That
Yeah.
that
Right.
that's a
That's a
different
different
story,
story. Right.
you know. But especially with I used to like to have, we had besides my wife and I, we had 8 other musicians. I like to have a young kid or two because
Yeah.
somebody gave me a shot once upon a time. It is difficult because they're either in school or they're just out of school and they haven't like settled. They're not in a groove yet,
Right.
and
Right.
they're more likely to have conflicts and what have you. And in some cases, they may not be mature enough to understand how to handle things the right way.
Yeah.
But I still thought it was worth it because there's a sense of kind of energy that kind of comes along with it. Sometimes you want to knock them in the head, but it's that intergenerational thing again.
Yep.
And there's not a lot of place where those kids can get this kind of experience.
Yeah.
It's a different gig playing in, and I don't care how good the college band is, in an air conditioned rehearsal hall or an air conditioned theater, and then playing 3 out of 4 nights outside in 85, 90-degree weather.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And you need to learn, if you're going to do that and playing service bands, a woodwind player, you need to learn reeds. You need to learn the kind of instruments and how to prepare for all that. You're not going to learn that in a what I call artificial academic kind of environment.
Yep.
And that's how I learned the hard way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm not a fan of plastic reeds, and I'm not a fan of those resin clarinets that Buffet came
Yep.
out with. But there's a time and a place for both of those.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
90
Right.
degrees and it's in Florida, it's
Uh,
100% humidity.
right.
Good luck with the traditional stuff. But it I just wish that these kids had more opportunities because they're so much more talented. I mean, I see it when I was in high school and college, if a guitar player knew 6 chords, it was like a big deal, and then they put a capo on, and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
Now
Right.
you go hear the improvement in guitar players today,
Yeah.
and they can play all the extensions, and they understand the the difference between, there's rhythm players and there's lead players.
Yeah.
Now, in a commercial setting, there's going to be one guitar player. If you can't figure out how to do both, you're going to stay home on Saturday night.
Yep.
Because how many bands can afford,
Yeah.
if it's a wedding band, if it's a party band, how many bands can afford two?
Yeah.
It's not it's not a viable situation. But that area, that instrument is probably improved, I think, more than any other over the last 50 years or so. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, hey, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing these experiences because I find the experiences to be so important because I think just like you say, I don't think people understand, what bands and what they've done in prior and in advance. And that's kind of why I wanted to do this podcast because I feel like folks really need to take the time to really understand where this live music comes. And just like you said, and there's all these great experiences and all those kind of different things.
And it
And
all it all kind of gets back to that phone call that you get if you're the leader. Oh, we need a band for an hour.
yeah, yep. Hmm.
And whether it's a community band or whether it's a
Yeah,
semi-pro or professional or a military band as well, do you have any concept of all the backroom work that has
yeah.
to go? And people would get mad at the military bands. Oh, we're having a parade like next Wednesday. Can you guys come and play for us? Well, we really only do one weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer. And if you go on our website, it says you have to submit a
Yeah.
request like 3, 4 months ahead of time. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, yeah, I didn't think of that, or, the guy that wants to hire you to play something for an hour. And it's like, okay, we can work out a deal, but stop and think what you're asking and appreciate what people do. A community
Yeah.
band, 30 people, 40 people, 50 people. If it's during the week, most of them work, or if they're dealing with kids or spouse, whatever it is, they
Hmm.
leave that life and they drive to wherever they're going to perform for you. They do that, and then they got to go back to their life, and they're either going to get yelled at or the kids or whatever. And while they're gone, who knows what the kids did? And and when people come together just for the love of playing, and whether it's a AAA performance or maybe something not that, stop and think of what went into it,
Right.
especially at the community band level.
Right.
I mean, they're up there giving you everything they have,
Yeah. Yeah.
and what went into a performance to make that happen. And in a professional situation, the expectations are always high, but you look at the weather, or you look at this, or you look at that, and it's like you could tell if the sound's not right some night. And we used to play 3 nights out of 4 in totally different venues.
Yeah. Hmm.
One night we'd have a professional sound crew that the sponsor provided. One night we're on a sound, what do you call them, the showmobiles, where the sound is bouncing off like a ping pong ball. And another night you might be playing outside with nothing behind you. As a drummer, I wanted to know where's MF tonight with my right cymbal. Well, and it totally different. You're
Yeah.
inside in a band box. But all that's, I mean, audiences, by and large, they're pretty cool,
Yeah.
and it's fun. I mean, you can only play so much golf, is the way I look at it.
Well, hey, as we're wrapping this up, I actually thought we would take some time and you can give a send off to the March USA 250. I thought we'll listen to it at the
Cool.
end, and I thought you could share a little bit about it. And we all obviously appreciate that you made this march, and I'm super excited to perform it, down in Wildwood. So I thought maybe with this recording, if you wanted to talk a little bit about it, and then I'll play it for
So
everybody.
it's basically a regimental style mark. There's no break strain. There's no machine gun piece of it. I think it's fun to play. I think it's fun to listen to. If you listen for those 3 notes at the end of the introduction, at the ending, you should be able to kind of figure out where the USA message comes across. Um, and it's far exceeded anything I ever expected it to do. Again, I wrote it for one band, and 150 bands have asked for it. So that's well beyond 100% of what I thought. But I hope people like it, and I hope people can also kind of put aside some of the nonsense that we have, and certainly on the 4th of July, just come together and enjoy and respect, those who have served. And I did dedicate it to citizens past, present, and future, because if there's going to be a 300th anniversary, I'm not going to be here for it. There's going to be a whole nother, there are people here that are going to play, an instrumental role in getting us there. And then there's people who aren't here yet. They're either not born, or maybe they're not in this country yet. But that intergenerational thing has to happen for us
Yeah.
to continue to do things like have community bands and have communities, period. So hopefully some of that spirit comes across in the piece.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So let me share here and we'll take a quick listen. Well, thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Um,
Technology may have gotten the better part of us there. It sounded
yeah,
a little weird, but
yeah,
it works though. Trust
it,
me.
yeah, a little skipped a little bit. I was hearing. I don't know if that was on my end or what, but at least give it
The
a
world
gist
of
of it.
you, the world of YouTube is an interesting one as
Yes,
well.
it is. Wait, well, hey, Joe, I wanted to say this. I wanted to first of all thank you so much for sharing March USA 250 to all the bands. If you are watching this podcast and if you're interested, I will put information on how to contact Joe down in the description. So feel free to contact him. He's more than willing to give you this for free, as he said, to get it out there. And as we said, 150 bands are actually performing it. So I think it's just an awesome endeavor, and I really appreciate you doing that. And I also wanted to say I appreciate you in the band world because you have so many great stories to share about band and what your experiences are, and it's breathtaking to me to see you're still performing. And I'm not trying to be smart here at all, just literally saying it's nice that you're still involved with the craft, still interested, still playing music and still being out there. And I also want to thank you for all your years of service too, in the military band. So thank you so much, Joe, for being in this podcast.
Thanks. It was fun to do.